Right now we have 3% growth, which is, pretty solid growth, I would say, by any measure. And we have inflation running under 3%. I don't see the stag or the inflation, actually.
No stag, no inflation, says Fed Chair Jay Powell. We've got that going for us. But no one in America seems happy, at least if you look at some of the recent consumer confidence surveys. Here to break down the disconnect and what this means for President Biden's reelection efforts is our Rick Newman. So, Rick, no stag, no inflation?
I thought that was a compliment to the Biden economy. I mean, I guess Jay Powell can't just come out and say the Biden economy is doing great. But if you've got no stag and you got no inflation, and we're coming from inflation, that sounds pretty good. But this is just not obviously not good enough for Joe Biden. And we're seeing so many very interesting gyrations. So, today's jobs report, we've been talking about it all day on the air. Job growth is slowing a little bit. So that's good for financial markets, and that is basically good for the outlook on inflation. But we could be pivoting to a point where voters start to say, well, they're unhappy about the job market, and they never got over inflation. Nobody has given Biden credit for what's been the good things that have been happening in this economy. And of course, they've been really criticizing him for inflation. I mean, this shows up in consumer confidence surveys, practically at recessionary levels. His approval rating stinks. So now we're getting to a point where maybe this is good for inflation, but the job market is weakening. So is this going to just be that Biden can't please anybody, that he's never going to get credit for bringing inflation down, and now people are going to start getting a little bit upset about a softening job market? Who knows? But we've only got about 6 months left at this point for voter attitudes to perk up in terms of Biden's handling of the economy, or he's in trouble in November.
Rick, I feel like if we're going to talk politics, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about, one of the biggest stories in the country right now, which is going on in these college campuses, right? Protests, the vandalism, the violence. Americans don't like that, Rick. I'm curious how you think, if at all, that has just kind of political ramifications, in your opinion, that could have.
So, Josh, we obviously didn't rehearse this ahead of time, and you said the biggest story going on. I was wondering if you're going to talk about the Trump trial in Manhattan.
That's what I thought too.
I guess that's not up there, but maybe when it...
You can sound off. Feel free, Rick. Go off on both.
Well, maybe when we get to a verdict, it'll rise by a notch or two. Biden did address what's been happening on campuses this week, and he did not side with the students for the most part. I mean, he really did address the anti-Semitism that has been seeping out through some of these protests. So I think we have to think about, where is this whole situation going to be by about October of this year? Will this war have wound down? Will we see some improvement in the situation over there? Especially,
I think, Rick, I think it's sooner than October. I would guess,
okay,
do you see it at the DNC convention is what I'd be looking for.
I mean, I don't think this is the 1960s. I mean, in the 1960s, when we did have it at the DNC convention, I mean, that was the United States being involved in a war and thousands of Americans dying in a war. I'm not seeing it. I mean, we're talking about a relatively small number of students on a few college campuses. And by the way, a lot of these protesters showing up at college campuses are not students. They're sort of like these sleeper cells of protesters who just look for it. So I'm not sure this has legs, but I think it really depends on what happens over in Israel and Gaza. Israel needs to wrap this up. And if they don't, ongoing problem.
Rick, thank you, buddy. Have a great weekend.
See you guys.